Today, I want to introduce you to John Hanger. For those of you that don't know John, he is the former CMO who became an investor and operator in early stage software companies. He was president and CEO of Flamenco Networks, which was acquired by Digital Evolution. He then became the co-founder and CEO of Contact at Once, an automotive chat juggernaut that was acquired by LivePerson. He moved on to become the president and CEO of Car360, who was then acquired by a little company you may know called Carvana in 2018. Currently, John is a board member and advisor to 3 software companies in the Atlanta area. I personally had the privilege of working under John from 2010 to 2015 during the acquisition by LivePerson. So this interview, as you can tell, is quite personal for me. John's somebody I learned a great deal from. With that, I'd like to welcome John Hanger. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm very, very honored to be here. Thankful for the time we were able to spend together working as part of the Contact at Once team.
I prepared a few questions. If you're ready, we can jump in.
Let's go.
My first question, from your perspective, John, what are the qualities that make someone good in business?
Well, yeah, nice opening question. There are endless books written on that topic as I think about people that I've worked with who've been successful business people, and I think about, what are some of the common threads? What are some of the things that I've observed? I would just say a bias towards action is probably the biggest one, right? And for context, I mean, my career has been early stage startups, which I think may be different than business in the sense of, giant mega corporations. But for the people that I've had the privilege of working with who were successful people, they all had a bias towards action, which means, they were all about getting things done. And it was better to make a mistake, get something done and make a mistake, do it quickly, than to sit around and talk about it and have 3 conference calls about it and so on.
On the other side of things, on the venture side, I wonder what makes a company one that you'll invest in? You've been both CEO and investor. So I'd love to know, what do you look for in an investment?
Yeah, well, first disclaimer, I'm not a professional investor. That's not my vocation. So my answer is going to be different, let's say, than a venture capitalist or somebody whose everyday job is investing. But after having several successes from a business perspective, I found myself with the ability to invest. And my first several angel investments were actually companies that I was involved in. The very first was Atlas Commerce, which was my 3rd startup, and lost all of it. So that was a good lesson as my first investment in the .com bubble. Each company that I've been involved in since then, I've invested in addition to working there. And so that was really the genesis of my investing was, if I just felt like if I believed enough in a company that I was going to invest myself in it, then I also had to put some money in it. I'm an investor in 15 different startups right now. My approach is, I either need to, on the one hand, know the founders and like the business model, or I need to like the business model and feel like I'm following smart money. And what I mean by that is, if there's someone else investing who I hold in high regard and think to be really smart and really understand the space, I might follow somebody else's investment.
And what attracts you in particular to B2B SaaS companies?
Well, I mean, that's all I've ever done, I guess, is the short answer, right? It's what I know. I have actually invested in one B2C company. It didn't end well, so that will probably be the last one I ever invested. But I just don't. I know the B2B SaaS world, and so that's where I'm most comfortable. And going back to the earlier criteria I shared, obviously, the businesses that you understand and know best are the ones you're going to feel most comfortable investing in.
But in some, you choose to be an operator, CEO, president, and others not so much. You're an advisor.
Right.
How do you decide whether to step in as CEO?
It's really sort of like the other way around, right? It's sort of like if an opportunity presents itself where I would be an operator and involved in the business, then the question is, is there an opportunity to invest as I come on board? I don't really think about it the other way, right? Like I don't go into prospective investments thinking, gee, is this one where I could go to work there?
You've done a lot in automotive retail. I think you spent over a decade, maybe up to 15 years, just focused on automotive retail. Like, why the focus there? Why is that important?
There was no plan there. The last two startups I've run as CEO were in fact in automotive retail. But if you turn the clock back, the 4 startups that I did prior to those two were B2B SaaS, selling, into CIOs and CTOs of very large enterprises, kind of your classic enterprise software type scenarios. So when I co-founded Contact at Once, it was I knew I was going into a different world, but at the time, my 2 co-founders, Mark and Scott, were actually targeting or thinking they were going to target the online yellow pages. That was thought to be the target market. And it was only after about a year after we founded Contact at Once and going through some market testing and so on that we sort of said, wow, automotive might actually be the better market to focus on. And so it was really just through that early Contact at Once experience that I stumbled into automotive retail, if you will. And then really came to love and appreciate the industry, have so many friends and so much respect for dealers and all the players in the automotive retail ecosystem today. When Car360 came along, it was sort of a natural extension of that.
You mentioned, some of the places you've been, many have been acquired. So, you were acquired by LivePerson, Contact at Once acquired by LivePerson. Car360 by Carvana. I'm wondering if there's anything that you picked up or learned from moving into leadership positions within these larger organizations.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say in terms of things learned, I put them into 2 buckets, right? One is just things about business in general, and the other is learning things about myself. On the business side, probably the single biggest thing I learned is that at scale, a very different management style and very different set of processes is required. Being an early stage startup guy, what I love and what I enjoy, and it shows in my career is, starting from something from scratch or almost scratch, creating a new category of solution that didn't previously exist, helping a market understand what it is, why it's important, working with a very small group of highly motivated people, building a culture in a company where everybody knows everybody because of the size of the team. That's what I love. That's what I know. And I think I can do reasonably well. When you get acquired though, and you're now part of a large publicly traded company, it's a very different thing. I really gained an appreciation and respect, particularly from the 2 companies that you just mentioned, LivePerson and Carvana, for this, for the ability to create a culture at a global scale and the business processes that allow a company to be successful at that sort of scale. In terms of what I learned about myself, I sort of maybe let the cat out of the bag there, right? Over time, over a number of acquisitions, I kind of figured out, like what I really enjoy. And sometimes it takes incremental experience to really, for any person to come to understand that. Maybe others, know it right out of the gate, but that wasn't me. It took several iterations, and it wasn't that I didn't enjoy or have some success working for these larger companies, because I did. But in terms of what I really enjoy, it's that small startup environment with a where everybody knows everybody. It's a family, and the group's trying to accomplish something that is seemingly impossible. That's what I love, and that's what gets me all excited.
I want to take you back a little bit. You got your degree in electrical engineering of all things, and were recruited by Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture. But then you delved into marketing. You eventually became a CMO. So how did you end up in marketing?
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy path, right? So turning the clock all the way back, my parent, I grew up in Western Montana. My dad worked at the post office. My mom was a homemaker. I had 4 sisters. three older. My parents really wanted me as their only son to go to the best school possible and get the good degree that leads to a good paying job. Got electrical engineering degree with a minor in applied optics, which is physics, right? So you can't get much geekier than a double E degree and with a physics minor. But during my senior year, I had a really rough call with my parents where I called them up and said, I worked in this field during my internship last summer, and I've decided I don't want to pursue this as a career. And needless to say, it was a rough conversation, but I ended up taking the job with what was then Anderson Consulting. I just sort of have a creative side as well, and an entrepreneurial side. So going the consulting route allowed me to sort of at least get away from the engineering, and then just through happenstance and providence, if you will, within my roughly 6 years at Anderson, I got assigned to a group that then existed, doesn't anymore, which was an enterprise software group at Anderson. And they were building enterprise software ERP type applications for the industry. This is in the early days of packaged ERP software. And at the ripe age of like 23 or 24, I was thrown into the deep end as what they called functional architect. We would call that today, like lead product manager, to create an all new ERP system for chemical manufacturers and food manufacturers. I had the skills and was given the opportunity to go out and demonstrate that product as it was sold into the market. So I transitioned out of the build the product to sell the product and demo the product. After a handful of implementations, we decided, this thing isn't just for a few clients. This is something we should brand and market. But I got to be a part of a team that launched this product and a brand around it. It was called Process One. I just really ignited within me a desire to do that over and over. And by the time I got to my third startup, I sort of had that experience. I became the VP of product marketing at that company. So I was still sort of coming at marketing from a product perspective, but was a part of the marketing team. And then it was my fourth startup where I got the CMO role, and I was smart enough to understand what I didn't do well in marketing and backfilled that with my team. It was a strange path. It's hard to get from double E physics to CMO, but that's how I did it.
Whoa, that is an interesting, exciting journey. And I started in the military as an analyst and then became an entrepreneur. I owned a business for 4 years, and that's how I learned the business side of it, and then ended up in marketing. So I completely understand how, you start in this analytical position. And I said, this isn't for me. I have this creative side, and I don't, I needed somewhere to put that. So it definitely resonates.
For your audience, I mean, marketing is such a broad set of skills and things that need to be done within a company at any stage. For early stage startups, I mean, there's a whole range of stuff that has to be done, but the thing at the very core is the positioning of the company, right? Like understanding the market, how to position the company. Is it a new category? Is it an existing category? How do you compare to known landmarks like competitors or other types of products that are already out there? And that, I would say, has always been my strength and what I was able to do. And it sort of leverages my product background and technical background a little bit. There's so many other marketing skills. And thinking back to when you and I first met, I remember well, when you interviewed and you were telling me about your military background and you, at that time you had your own little business. That was what attracted me, is your skill set in the other aspects of marketing was such a great compliment to my skill set, and that's I suspect partly why we did so much good together.
To that point, I watched you lead go to market and learned the wisdom of investing in both an air game and a ground game, one deal at a time. This sometimes meant slow, steady progress with partners and distribution channels while you focused on high sales output and retention. Mm-hmm. As a CEO, how do you stay locked in and disciplined under the pressure and demands for instant success, immediate returns, to really develop that both air and ground game?
Yeah, well, I would say the answer is, it's a different answer for each company, and it's a function of where that company is, where the market that they're selling into is in terms of the adoption curve. You have to be able to dynamically adjust based on what's going on in the market. In the experience that you and I shared, Contact at Once, we founded it in 2005. We sold it in 2014. I mean, it was 9.5 years. That by startup standards, that's like an eternity, right? We had grown it to, I forget, 22-25 million, something like that in trailing 12 revenues. But it wasn't like the fastest rocket ship ever. It was just slow and steady growth. We had to have both an air game and a ground game that corresponded to that. In contrast, like my third startup, this is the one that I lost all the money on in the .com bubble. When I first joined as CMO in the early days of that company, we had to position the company. We had to get some early customers. We raised a $35 million seed round, which at the time was like, that just didn't happen. Tremendous pressure to grow. And for those old enough to remember, I mean, the big thing back then was if you were a .com startup, I mean, you needed to be advertising with full page ads in the Wall Street Journal. I had come from sort of a bootstrap type background, and all of a sudden, like the board's like, when's the ad going to be in the Wall Street Journal? And I'm like, it's like $350K for a half page. They're like, yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh. I guess the point is that, it depends on the company, depends on the board, depends on the market. Sometimes things have to appropriately go faster. Sometimes you need to pace it. I've probably been most successful in the companies that were more bootstrapped, where it was a little more measured and not like artificial pressure to just spend and go build a brand. It's been more like incremental based on the success on the sales side, creating a lemming effect, fear of missing out when you've got a new product category, and then benefiting as the market catches on and everybody wants to have one.
Yeah, to that point, I wondered how you get to that tipping point in visibility and market share that makes an acquisition possible.
So comment one, before I fully answer the question, is like, I've never taken the approach of I want to get to where an acquisition is possible. Like, I never go into a business thinking we just got to get to this stage and then we're going to sell the company. I think that's very unhealthy, and some of my early mentors influenced me that way. So I've always taken the approach like, let's do what's right to grow this business. And if we build a successful, profitable, fast-growing business, the reality is there probably will be opportunities to be acquired, but that's not the goal. The way that you approach it is just, you need to think about the market you're selling into. And as I mentioned, most of the products that I've had the opportunity to bring to market were new categories where, you're not going in and selling against some known competitor just by differentiating on this little feature or that little feature. It's more like creating a whole new category. As an example, turning the clock way back, my second startup was a company called Mercator, and they had been in the EDI space, but we felt like there was a way to pivot the company and use the technology to create a whole new category, which took the better part of a year to convince Gartner that this was in fact a new category. But once they actually embraced the intellectual argument we had put in front of them, they acknowledged it. They came up with the term, actually, EAI, Enterprise Application Integration. But that was like the moment. I mean, literally like the moment that the Gartner article was published and they said there's this whole new category called EAI, and this company Mercator's an early leader in it. Like, I knew at that point we'd have to really screw up to not have a successful company, right? Because that's like magic. And in fact, we were able to execute strongly. That company ended up having an IPO. And so that was great.
I'm going to pivot a little bit now into, we've talked about business a bit. I want to talk a little bit about leadership. That's something that you've impressed on so many that have worked for you and been sort of a mentor there. How do you define leadership? What makes somebody a good leader in your opinion?
To me, leadership has been in the context of small early stage startups with small teams. And I emphasize that because I think the qualities of a good leader in that environment are different than the qualities of a good leader of a multinational corporation, for example, right? So for me, the things I always focused on was just being genuine and real, right? Like, everybody's always like, oh, you've been a 3-time CEO. And I'm like, well, I'm almost uncomfortable with that, because like CEO implies more like the multinational corporation leadership type stuff. And that's not me, right? Like a CEO in an early stage startup is really just one of the team, right? And yes, there's some additional responsibilities, but at the end of the day, you just need to be a genuine person, part of a small team, taking care of each other, treating each other like family. Everybody's making huge personal sacrifices in the interest of moving the company forward. I've read, probably like everybody in your audience, a lot of leadership books over time. It was only recently that I read a series of books by an author by the name of Boyd Bailey that I thought, with a little bit of benefit of retrospect, sort of summed up my management style. And he has 3 books. One of them is called Learning to Lead Like Jesus. And that's not to say that I at all want to compare myself to Jesus, fall short every day. But I think, to me, Jesus is a perfect example of the ultimate type of leadership. And there's a lot to be learned from the Bible. And in retrospect, I think that's a lot of where my management style developed from, was my faith and understanding from the Bible of Jesus's character.
In terms of leadership, something that I study as a marketer is communication. And I wonder, how important is it for a leader to be able to communicate? Super
important. I would rate my communication skills as pretty average, actually. But this is where I mentioned earlier the authentic or genuine aspect of it. I think that's why that's so important. I'm not the kind of guy that can go into a meeting and have everybody leaving, ready to run through walls and that sort of thing, like a football coach or something like that, right? But what I can do is, through sort of my body of work, have the credibility to go in, communicate clearly and plainly, and people will know that I'm speaking the truth and not misleading them and not overhyping something or underselling something. They'll know where they stand and where the company stands. And I think in those small startup type environments, that's super valuable, because there's a lot of ups and downs, and it requires a lot of just mutual trust within the team. And so, just genuine communication is what's always worked best for me.
Now, I've watched you hire well for years, and you talked a little bit about, some of your calculus in hiring me. What do you look for when hiring new employees for startups like this? You said, they're going to be ready to make a commitment. What do you look for?
I'll circle back to the ultimate answer to your question, but I want to highlight something that I look for as a filter. In contrast to back in the day when I first started doing startups, when back in those days, you were viewed as like, oh, so you couldn't make it in like the real business world, so you're going to do a startup. I mean, it wasn't the glamorous sort of thing to be an entrepreneur that it is today. So fast forward to more recent times, there's an awful lot of people who come in and say, I've been working for fill in the blank big company for years. I've been promoted through 18 layers. I'm now a senior vice president, but all I really want to do is come to work for a startup. Or I've been working at a consulting company for 20 years, but what I really have always wanted to do is be a part of a startup and be an entrepreneur. And to me, that's like the first filter. I'm not saying that people like that can't be successful, but in my experience, the vast majority of people with that story end up failing, simply because they're enamored with the glamour of it and what they've read about the entrepreneurial experience. To them, it's all about the glamour of the experience. It's not about like the pain and suffering and roller coaster ride and all the things that actually comes with being an entrepreneur. And so I try to, as a first filter, just take people that I feel like have a genuine interest in actually riding the roller coaster and are prepared for it mentally, knowing that that's what it's going to be like, right? It's rarely just a rocket ship. Let's just take off and everything's super great. So that's the first filter. Beyond that, I think I don't have like a checklist, and obviously it depends a little bit on the position that I'm hiring for. But But I look at character and weigh that heavily. Skills are important, experience is important, but character is paramount.
As a member of your team, you asked me and others to adhere to 4 tenets. I remember them. I've carried on using them with my own teams. The first tenet was focus on revenue. The second was to play your role. The third was to take ownership. And the fourth was don't let your team down or your teammates down. Where did these come from?
I don't remember where those first came from. I'm sure I probably stole them from one of my mentors. Jerry O'Connell was the CEO of my first and third startups and was very influential on me. He had been a serial entrepreneur. At the end of the day, that really kind of sums up, particularly the last one is where the character comes in, right? And you saw this at Contact at Once, but everybody there had everybody's back. If something needed to be done and somebody had a situation at home or whatever, there was always somebody else willing to step up and get it done. That's the sort of attitude that I think not only helps build the company, but I think it helps build the team, right? Because if you know that you got people working with you that care about you personally and that will pick up the slack for you when you really need it, it also has the side benefit of creating a culture where you feel accountability and you don't want somebody to have to pick up the slack for you because you feel bad when that happens. So you work that much harder to make sure it gets right.
You've assembled, invested in, and inspired many successful teams over the years, as I mentioned. What has it meant for you to have former employees feel a sense of loyalty to you, and why do you think that is?
Well, I don't know how to answer that, honestly. In terms of how it makes me feel, I know how to answer that. Makes me feel special and somewhat undeserving, right? But when people I've worked with say things like, "Man, that was the best part of my career," learn so much or whatever. That really means a lot because it's an important part of why I enjoyed the experience. Like I said earlier, what I've learned about myself is, it's not the selling the company and the balance in the bank account and whatever. The things that last are the relational aspects, the relationships you build, and there's a deepness to relationships that you can't achieve when everything's just going well or when you're just casually working together. In a startup environment, there's so many ups and downs, so many good things that happen, bad things that happen, and going through that together, you build relationships that are just special. And so that's why I value that stage of company, why I enjoy doing startups. And I think that's why those sorts of relationships have come out of it.
And as we wrap up here, I just got one more question for you. What's next for John Hanger?
Well, yeah, I appreciate you asking. So, as you mentioned, there's a number of companies and, young CEOs that I'm advising. I enjoy that. I left Carvana about a year and a half ago, just to share something on a personal side. My wife, Jennifer, who's been my ultimate business partner through these 6 startups, was diagnosed with terminal cancer about 3 years ago. And, at the time we were still living perfectly normal lives. But about a year and a half ago, her condition deteriorated to where I needed to leave Carvana in order to care for her. We're just super thankful for every day. And so the short answer to your question is right now, she's my priority. I can do I can do some of these other things on the side, the investing, the advising and so on. But she's my priority. There is one other thing that's crept into my interest here lately. The use of artificial intelligence and natural language processing in the context of Bible translation has really caught my interest. I've been to a couple conferences and have spent a lot of time getting to know different players in that ecosystem. And there's 3,000 plus languages in the world into which the Bible has still not been translated, either orally or written wise. So, being able to maybe help there would be also on my list of things to do, but I'm still trying to figure out how I can help.
Well, thank you for the time. Thank you for inspiring all of us and taking the time to sit down and go through your own experience and giving us some tidbits about, business and leadership and what's next.